Ardennes, 16th of December 1944. Before dawn, the forest holds its breath. Snow presses low over the Eifel ridges. Allied phones crackle, then fall quiet. On the map, this sector is quiet. At 05:30, the quiet ends. German guns open along an 80-mile front. A timed barrage reported at roughly 90 minutes, covering the approaches opposite the 6th Panzer Army. Patrols stumble back through the trees with the same unwelcome word: attack. The files on the desks at 1st Army and Chef had said the enemy lacked fuel, pilots, and nerve for a winter blow. The enemy answered with your 30 divisions, about 240,000 men, driving for the Meuse, and if the timetables held, Antwerp beyond it. Radios yield little. The Germans have lived on landlines. Weather sits on the treetops, grounding Allied reconnaissance and the fighters that usually keep columns honest. What the plans dismissed as impossible now arrives as fact, in snow and steel across the American line. In the hours ahead, crossroads names will become verdicts: Losheim, St. Vith, Bastogne, because a single shared mistake has given the attackers days. And in war, a few days can be an empire. The question is how that mistake was made, and how it was finally paid for. The order was to change the map, not the weather. Through late November, early December 1944, Army Group B under Field Marshal Walter Model finished assembling 3 armies behind the Eifel-Ardennes screen for a single shock. Drive west, cross the Meuse in 4 to 5 days, and split the Allied coalition by seizing Antwerp. The main weight sat north, where 6th Panzer Army, SS Oberstgruppenführer Josef Sepp Dietrich, would punch between Monschau-Losheim and Büllingen-Malmedy. In the center, 5th Panzer Army, General Hasso von Manteuffel, would break the American line along the Schnee-Eifel-Clairvaux corridor and pour armor through the Bastogne road hub. South 7th Army, General Erich Brandenberger, guarded the flank toward Luxembourg and the Sauer Hour. The start time was set, H-hour 05:30, 16th December 1944. The opening barrage would run for roughly 90 minutes across an 180-mile front. The order of battle was not a rumor. By launch morning, the Germans had committed Y-29 to 30 divisions, including 10 armored Panzer Grenadier, and on the order of 240,000 troops to the first blow, with additional formations marching to follow on lines. ISS Panzer Corps, Kepler, and 2 SS Panzer Corps, Bittrich, provided the heavy punch under 6th Panzer Army, XL7 Panzer Corps, von Lüttwitz, and L-5 Panzer Corps, Kriebel, were Manteuffel's exploitation tools. LXXX Corps and LXXX-V Corps screened Brandenberger's south wing. The route cards were explicit: seize crossings near Huy and Den on the Meuse, then pivot for Antwerp. Every day lost east of the river bled the concept. The surprise was deliberate. German staffs clamped traffic to landlines, kept major radio nets cold, and moved divisions at night or under low cloud that smothered Allied tactical air and reconnaissance. Where Allied analysts assumed starvation, fuel, trained crews, spares, the Germans banked enough for a sprint, calculating that captured U.S. dumps would refill columns once the line broke. It was a high-risk schedule built on one premise: that the Ardennes, quiet on Allied maps, thinly held for refit, would buy days of freedom of action. On the Allied side, the picture looked smaller than the plan. 12th Army Group, Gen. Omar Bradley, treated the Ardennes as an economy of force sector. 1st Army, General Courtney Hodges, stretched divisions over woods and ridges that seemed to forbid a massed attack. Veit Corps, General Troy Middleton, held the southern half of the threatened front with a mix of battle-tired and green units. Vith Corps covered the north around Monschau-Elsenborn with battle-experienced formations but long exposed seams. Intelligence summaries up to 15th of December leaned the same way. German regrouping, yes. A winter offensive toward the Meuse, unlikely. The logic was neat: short on fuel, air pounded. Morale brittle, winter closing in, neat and wrong. because the plan's geometry exploited the map's habits. 7 road hubs like Bastogne were not just towns. They were multipliers. Crack them open and armor could run the spokes. Leave them intact, and the timetable stalled while columns funneled through forest lanes into pre-registered artillery. That is why 5th Panzer Army's overlays glowed around Bastogne, and why Dietrich's left sought to lever past Malmedy-Stavelot for the Meuse crossings before the skies cleared. Every hour of grounded Allied air was an hour the German march tables could hold. At 05:30 on 16th December, the plan met the picture in flame. The barrage rolled. Phones went dead. Volksgrenadier regiments pressed into the woods behind pioneer teams who cut wire and guided assault guns by hand. By mid-morning, U.S. outposts from the Losheim Gap to the Schnee Eifel were reporting penetrations and broken lines. By nightfall, entire battalions were fighting back by compass. The enemy's objective was not to nibble a salient, it was to reach the Meuse, and the opening day had already bought them what they needed most: time. Those hours only mattered because of what the Allies didn't see in the days before. The silence on the airwaves, the weather enclosing the treetops, and the assumptions written into G2 binders. That blind spot, the one mistake, is the subject of the next section. The Ardennes surprise wasn't magic. It was a stack of small certainties the Allies thought they owned: signals intelligence, air reconnaissance, and logistics analysis, turned off, grounded, or misread for just long enough to matter. Signals first. Since 1941, the Allies had grown used to living inside German radio nets. When field armies and Luftwaffe commands talked, Ultra often heard them. In December 1944, the German High Command ordered the opposite: hold major formations on landlines, keep high-level radio circuits quiet until the last possible moment, and bury genuine movements inside deception chatter about refit and defense. Corps and division staffs hand-carried orders at night, truck columns staged under trees. The Allied habit, if it's big, we'll hear it, met an enemy that refused to be heard. The result was a negative picture that analysts read as absence rather than concealment. Then the weather. From 16 to roughly 22 December, low cloud, freezing fog, and snow sat on the treetops. Reconnaissance squadrons that usually flagged road columns, assembly areas, and railheads were stuck on the ground. Tactical air, the standing guarantee that any daylight massing would be punished, was largely silent in the opening days. That quiet ran straight into German march tables. Armored spearheads could close to the line without the expected air attrition, and field guns could be dragged forward on ice-narrowed roads without drawing fighter bombers. The same overcast that hid the Germans also muffled Allied reaction, because staffs that normally confirmed ominous reports from the air had to guess in white noise. Bias did the rest. Allied G2 summaries up to 15th December leaned on a tidy syllogism. Germany lacked fuel, trained pilots, and transport. Therefore, Germany could not mass an offensive in winter. That logic was partly true and entirely misleading. The German plan did not require months of fuel. It required enough for a 4-5-day sprint to the Meuse, plus captured U.S. dumps to keep going. It did not require air parity. It required bad weather for a week. It did not require full-strength panzer divisions everywhere. It concentrated ISS Panzer Corps and 2 SS Panzer Corps in the north and X-Elva Panzer Corps in the center, while 7th Army held a thinner southern screen. In short, the Germans asked different questions than the Allies were answering. Maps misled too. On Allied wall charts, the Ardennes was an economy of force sector: woods, ridges, and bad roads, held by a mix of battle-tired and green units. On German overlays, it was a door hinged on road hubs like Bastogne and St. Vith. If you crack a 7-road town, a corps can pour through. If you leave it intact, columns back up for miles. That is why 5th Panzer Army highlighted Clairvaux, Bastogne, and Malmedy-Stavelot in red grease pencil. The geography invited tempo if the first day worked. It punished caution if it didn't. The administrative picture reinforced comfort. 12th Army Group had stretched 1st Army thin to support offensives north and south. Vith Corps in the southern half of the threatened front, covered a broad frontage with formations resting or refitting. Routine frontline rotations, which made sense in November, produced long seams in December, places where Volk's grenadier divisions could pry at regimental boundaries in dark woods and find battalion command posts before dawn. When the barrage began at 05:30, 16th of December, phones went out in clusters because multiple pairs of hands had strung the wire just days earlier. No one unit owned the net well enough to fix it quickly under fire. Warning signs existed, but they were discounted. Prisoners and patrols reported unusual traffic. Belgian civilians whispered of night movements. A few ground observers noted new unit markings near the Schnee Eifel. Analysts fitted those fragments to the standing picture: local counterattacks, defensive buildup, rotation of battered divisions. Without aerial confirmation or big radio ultra-intercepts, no single piece could force a change in conclusion. The system had self-confidence. The enemy exploited self-confidence as a seam. Causality tightens to the hour. Radio silence and landlines denied the Allies their favorite sensor. Weather denied the second, air reconnaissance and attack, cognitive. Bias filled the vacuum with the least dangerous. Interpretation. Thin dispositions and long seams guaranteed that when the blow landed, it would gain days, not hours. Those days were the currency the German plan was built to spend. 6th Panzer Army needed the Monschau-Malmedy door open by day 2 to 3. 5th Panzer Army needed Bastogne dominated by day 3-4, and both needed the Meuse crossings approached by day 4 to 5 while the sky stayed closed. The Allied one mistake, treating a lack of signals and pictures as a lack of threat, bought the attacker precisely that window. And yet, the same mechanics that hid the buildup would eventually undo the offensive. When the sky lifted, Allied air and logistics woke up in a way the plan could not survive. When towns like Bastogne and St. Vith refused to fall on schedule, the German timetable broke teeth on road hubs. To see how the mist translated into ground truth, and how frictions began to claw time back, we need to examine the angles of the fight: signals and silence, weather as a weapon, mirror imaging, the real order of battle in the woods, U.S. dispositions on the eve, and the opening day cost of surprise. For years the Allies had grown accustomed to hearing the enemy. Army group traffic, Luftwaffe operations nets, and logistics chatter often betrayed intent. Ultra made the war feel transparent. In December 1944, the German High Command turned the glass to stone. Major headquarters were ordered to hold to landlines. Movement orders moved by courier at night. Higher-level radio nets stayed dark until formations were already in motion. Corps and divisions rehearsed radio blackout drills so thoroughly that opening day indicators, net tests, call sign changes, never appeared. Allied listening posts logged less, not more, noise in the days before 05:30, 16th December, and the absence was read as reassurance. Hard data points fixed the effect. First, H-hour arrived with no high-level prelude on the air, only the broad barrage along an 80-mile front that telephone lines could not warn in time. Second, when ISS Panzer Corps and ex-Salvan Panzer Corps punched through the Losheim Gap and Schnee Eifel belts, Allied radio direction findings still had no fix on massed German nets because the Germans were still not transmitting. Causality: landlines plus radio silence, an intelligence picture built on negatives. Analysts conditioned to treat big moves as loud moves, discounted prisoner hints and fragmentary reports of night columns because the radios did not agree. In practice, the enemy had not gone quiet. He had shifted the medium. When the first Volksgrenadier wave stepped off behind the 90-minute barrage, the Allied advantage, knowing before seeing, had been inverted at the operational level. Surprise was not an accident. It was a communications plan. From 16 through roughly 22 December, the Ardennes sat under low cloud, freezing fog, and snow. That forecast didn't merely inconvenience airmen. It rewrote the ground fight. Allied doctrine assumed that daylight concentrations would trigger fighter-bomber punishment within minutes. Instead, reconnaissance squadrons were grounded, and TAC Air, 9 Tactical Air Command in the north, nice in the center, could fly only sporadically. German march tables, calibrated to that week of overcast, moved artillery forward on iced roads and panzer spearheads to the line with a fraction of the attrition they'd absorbed in July-September 1944. 2 data points illustrate the hinge. First, the opening 48 to 72 hours produced the largest gains of the campaign. Penetrations across the Losheim sector and the Schnee Eifel, and deep thrusts that would threaten Stavelot, Malmedy, and Clairvaux, Bastogne before the sky changed. Second, when the weather lifted on 23 December, Allied air immediately flew hundreds of sorties per day, strafing columns, wrecking bridges, and, crucially, resupplying isolated U.S. strongpoints by C-47 and glider. The German timetable that relied on 6 or 7 bad weather days suddenly had to pay an air tax it could not afford. Causality is direct. Grounded recon, blind staffs, grounded fighter bombers, cheaper German road movement, clear weather, Allied interdiction plus resupply. The same overcast that hit assembly areas also delayed Allied recognition of the offensive's true weight. When the ceiling came off, the operational physics reversed. Plans premised on reaching the Meuse by day 4 to 5 were now dragging crippled columns across blown fords, while American pockets, Bastogne, St. Vith, could breathe. The most dangerous assumption in the room was tidy. Germany lacks fuel, trained crews, and transport. Therefore, Germany cannot launch a major winter offensive. That syllogism appeared in G2 summaries up to 15th of December. It was half true and wholly misleading. The German plan banked enough fuel for a 4-5-day sprint, intended to live off captured U.S. dumps beyond that. It did not require air superiority, only bad weather. It relied on concentration, not equality, massing I and the H-2 SS Panzer Corps in the north and ex-Fevrian Panzer Corps in the center, while leaving the Southern 7th Army thin. 2 concrete contrasts expose the mirror. Allied analysts expected any large operation to advertise itself with radio traffic and visible logistical staging. The Germans chose landlines and night movement. Allied planners assumed the Ardennes forests and roads forbade rapid exploitation. German overlays treated 7 road hubs, Bastogne, St. Vith, as multipliers that, if cracked, would let armor flow down the spokes. The causal chain of error runs: resource analysis, underestimation, misread indicators, thin dispositions left unreinforced. Thus, 8th Corps held long frontages with fatigued and green divisions, and 1st Army accepted seams that looked safe on paper. When the blow fell at 05:30 on 16th December, the lack of prior big move signatures confirmed the bias rather than challenged it. Only when road hubs refused to fall on schedule, and when the weather lifted on the 23rd, did the premise collapse. By then the enemy had purchased days, and days, in December 1944, were a currency the Allies could least afford to spend for free. Those 3 lenses, silence on the nets, weather as a shield, and assumptions that fit the wrong war, explain why the first shock landed so deep. Next, we look at the other side of the hill. What was actually in the woods, how U.S. divisions were arrayed on the eve, and what the opening day surprise cost in ground men and time. The assault mass was not a rumor. It had names, corps flags, and march tables. North of the line, 6th Panzer Army stacked its punch with ISS Panzer Corps, Kepler, and the Zau SS Panzer Corps, Bittrich, each fielding armored spearheads intended to break past Monschau-Losheim-Malmedy and fan toward the Meuse. Center sector weight came from 5th Panzer Army, Manteuffel, using ex-Loved Panzer Corps, von Luttwitz, through the Schnee Eifel-Clairvaux corridors, with the road hub Bastogne circled in red. South, 7th Army, Brandenburger, guarded the flank with LXXX and LXXXV Corps, trading density for frontage. By H-hour, by to 29 to 30 divisions, including roughly 10 armored Panzer Grenadier, and on the order of 240,000 troops were aligned for the opening blow. with additional formations marching to follow. On the northern axis, ISS Panzerkorps pushed armored Kampfgruppen that mixed tanks, Panzergrenadiers, engineers, and assault guns into road-cutting columns, Kampfgruppe Piper being the headline example, tasked to seize bridges over the Amblève and Orte, then pivot west. In the center, 26th Volksgrenadier Division and 2nd Panzer Division cracked at U.S. village strongpoints, Clairvaux, Wiltz, to pry open the lanes that fed Bastogne. Artillery density mattered. German staffs tried to mass tubes to battalion-per-kilometer levels on breach sectors for the first 90 minutes, then drag guns forward in the overcast to keep pressure continuous. Cause and effect. Concentration at 2 operational doors, north and center, plus timed artillery plus. Overcast created a first-day picture where U.S. outposts were hit simultaneously along a broad arc. The German plan counted on that simultaneity to buy days. Long. Enough for armored heads to pass through American regimental seams and get onto the road nets before Allied air could rejoin the fight. The Allied line in the Ardennes was thin by design. 12th Army Group treated it as a rest and refit sector while main efforts pressed elsewhere. 1st Army, Hodges, covered a wide frontage with mixed formations. In the north around Elsenborn-Losheim, the veteran 99th and 2nd Infantry Divisions held exposed woods lines and road cuts. In the center-south, 8th Corps, Middleton, stretched the 106th Infantry Division onto the Schnee-Eifel, 2 regiments, on a salient that looked quiet on a November map and spread the worn 28th Infantry Division across villages anchoring the approaches to Wiltz and Bastogne. The 4th Infantry Division held farther north around the Our-Rower belts, while cavalry groups and engineer battalions filled literal gaps. 2 hard facts explain why the first 48 hours bent the way they did. Frontage per regiment in key sectors was excessive. Battalions owned miles of forest track, with CPs and wire nets only recently emplaced and vulnerable to the opening bombardment. Reserves were few and distant. In Vith Corps, mobile armor that might have counterpunched immediately, like 10th Armored Division, was parceled and not yet massed forward. Artillery was present, but road capacity through the woods constrained rapid reconcentration. This was economy of force done by the book, until the enemy wrote a different book. When the blow fell, green regiments on the Schnee-Eifel faced envelopments from multiple directions. Village strongpoints in the 28th Division zone saw company and battalion-sized attacks converge before dawn. The line did not collapse everywhere. In the Elsenborn Ridge sector, the 99th and 2nd fought the ground to a standstill. But elsewhere, the dispositions guaranteed that surprise would purchase space, and therefore time, before a coherent operational response could form. Surprise buys hours. Hours buy ground and casualties. In the first 72 hours, German spearheads forced penetrations across the Losheim Gap and around the Schnee-Eifel. The most painful, ledger entry came when 2 regiments of the 106th Infantry Division, the 422nd and 423rd, were encircled east of St. Vith and compelled to surrender on 19th December, yielding thousands of prisoners, on the order of 6,000, a shock that rippled through 8 Corps' communications and planning. To the southwest, the road battles through Clairvaux and Wiltz bled 28th Division companies white, but slowed 2nd Panzer and 26th Volksgrenadier, buying clock cycles for a stand at Bastogne. Equipment attrition tracked the map. Artillery pieces abandoned when roadblocks formed behind batteries. Supply columns overrun on forest lanes. Bridges lost that forced multi-hour detours. The St. Vith Roadstar became a friction engine, with U.S. forces holding a defensive node that diverted German armor and wrecked march tables through 23 December. Every day the Elsenborn Ridge held, every night St. Vith stayed contested, and every hour Bastogne refused to open. The attack's calculus degraded. Causality is unambiguous. Intelligence miss. Thin dispositions hit simultaneously. Early penetrations and mass POW loss, but also local stubborn terrain holds, schedule slips, Enemy outruns fuel and road capacity. By 2021 December, Bastogne was encircled. By 22 December, the defenders rejected an ultimatum. And when the weather lifted on 23 December, Allied air and resupply began to claw back exactly the days the mistake had seeded. The turning point, how surprise spent itself between 16–19 December and how 20 to 26 December wrote the counter, arrives next, HU hour, 0530, 16th December 1944. The barrage does its first job, cut wire and phones, stun outposts and mask the start lines. When it lifts in sectors from Monschau-Losheim to the Schnee-Eifel, Volksgrenadier battalions move under the trees with assault guns tucked close, engineers carrying Bangalore torpedoes, and wire cutters. Within 2 hours, reports from company CPs across V and the 8th Corps adopt the same grammar: penetrations, flanks in the air, artillery displaced without orders. The shock is simultaneous by design, and simultaneity buys time, the commodity the plan needs most. Northern door to the Meuse, if it opens. On the 6th Panzer Army front, ISS Panzer Corps pushes its armored Kampfgruppen behind the infantry's first tiers. A column like Kampfgruppe Piper, tanks, half-tracks, pioneers, flak, fuel trucks, threads the Losheim Gap during 16 to 17 December, aiming to seize crossings on the Amblève and Orthe before roadblocks can congeal. The same overcast that blinded Allied reconnaissance gives German march tables a rare gift: a winter daylight run with minimal fighter-bomber harassment. U.S. 99th and 2nd Infantry Divisions refuse to rupture at Elsenborn Ridge. They dig on the spine and pour artillery into the woods, turning the Bullingen-Malmedy avenues into chutes filled with splinters and stalled vehicles. Here the plan's curve flattens. Elsenborn will not break, but the pressure in the seams south of the ridge keeps route options alive for another day. Center. The hinge on Bastogne. In Vith Corps, the blow falls hardest where it is least survivable. The 106th Infantry Division spread thin across the Schnee-Eifel, in a salient that looks safe on a November map and lethal on a December one. 16 to 17th December, German forces enveloped the salient's shoulders, leveraging forest tracks to reach regimental rears. Clairvaux and Wiltz turn into day-long fights as elements of 2nd Panzer and 26th Volksgrenadier pry the road net feeding Bastogne. The 28th Infantry Division, still scabbed with losses from November, throws company-sized hedgehogs into stone villages to break the rhythm of each German advance. Every village that holds for 6 hours forces a timetable slip. Every fallback after night trades a mile of ground for a day of delay. Logistics groan, first for the Americans. The opening 48 hours cost guns and trucks where roads behind the line turn to ice and then to choke points. Batteries displace under fire without time for full limbers. Ammunition trains try to nose forward and meet columns going the other way. Corps artillery can still mass fires, but only where roads will bear. Elsewhere, battalions fire until their basic loads worn red and then fall back to the next pre-surveyed lanes. The map that promised a quiet sector in November now behaves like a machine devised to ruin staff work. Long forested routes, poor lateral connections, and towns that matter out of all proportion because 7 roads meet there. Said December, the consequences of surprise get names. In the north, Piper's column punches through Bullingen fuel dumps and angles toward Stavelot, hunting bridges that lead to the Amblève Valley and, beyond it, the Meuse corridor. The same day, on the center-south, U.S. company and battalion CPs north of Clairvaux report armor nosing into village streets at noon that were quiet at dawn. The shock is not only tactical, it is cognitive. 12th Army Group and 1st Army staffs have spent a year living with Ultra's comfort and air power's brute correction. Now radios are silent and skies closed, and the briefing slide that said unlikely is being revised at the point of contact. December, St. Vith and the Roadstar. St. Vith becomes friction in concrete. 7th Armored Division under Brig. General Bruce C. Clark begins assembling a defensive node that will perturb every German march table within 30 kilometers. The geometry is simple. St. Vith's roads are the only straight way west for much of 5th Panzer Army. If the node stands for 2 to 4 days, divisional columns must swing to worse routes in winter, and ex-Allied Panzer Corps loses the punching power needed to exploit toward Bastogne and the Meuse. Fire missions stack. Roadblocks appear and reappear. Engineers and tank destroyers trade their lives at culverts and bends to hold the clock. South and center. The price paid in prisoners. On 19th of December, the 422nd and 423rd Infantry Regiments of the 106th, cut off east of St. Vith after the Schnee-Eifel encirclement matured, are compelled to surrender, yielding on the order of 6,000 American prisoners. The shock is practical as well as moral. 2 regiments removed from the map means lacunae that neighboring divisions cannot backfill at once, artillery observers gone, and already strained roads choked with retreating foot columns that should have been riding. Every lost regiment is also lost staff memory of the ground, and in the woods in winter that knowledge is survival. Bastogne. The crossroads becomes a verdict. Through 18 to 19 December, 10th Armored Division's combat commands and the 101st Airborne Division begin sliding into Bastogne under fragmentary orders, while the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion's M18 Hellcats rattle in around 2021 December. They are not yet a full ring, but they are a plan, one that understands the enemy's plan better than the enemy does. On the 19th, village battles east, Clairvaux, Wiltz, and southeast, Marvy, Neffe, bleed German time. Each destroyed lead tank in a constricted lane forces dismounts. Each dismount under pre-registered 105s, 155s turns a thrust into a casualty bracket. If Bastogne survives into day 4, the dash to the Meuse is no longer a dash. It is a detour. North again, a ridge that refuses to move. Despite successes in the gaps, the Elsenborn Ridge sector hardens into a joint the German northern hammer cannot break. The 99th and 2nd Divisions, with massed artillery and terrain that rewards the defender, keep the door to Liège wedged shut. That reality matters beyond its map square. It means 6th Panzer Army cannot flood the northern road net with armor on day 2-3 as planned, which in turn forces the center's columns to carry a burden they were meant to share. In an offensive built on days, this is the first day that does not pay back its cost. Why the first 72 hours mattered. The Allied intelligence miss, treating radio silence and lack of aerials as lack of threat, had guaranteed that surprise would be operational, not merely tactical. The evidence is on the map. Penetrations across a broad front. A major POW loss on the 19th. German armored heads west of their start lines by tens of kilometers, and road hubs under attack almost at once. Yet the same map shows the cracks. A ridge that holds, Elsenborn, a road star that snarls, St. Vith, and a crossroads, Bastogne, where the defenders arrive in time to draw a ring the enemy did not budget for. Evening, 19th December. Dawn, 20th December. The offensive has spent its pure surprise. What remains is its weather and momentum. If the skies stay closed and Bastogne opens, 5th Panzer Army can pour through the spokes and test the Meuse by day 4 to 5. If the skies lift and St. Vith and Bastogne stay stubborn, fuel columns will idle behind burning bridges while Allied artillery, armor, and soon, air reassert the physics of 1944. That hinge, 2026 December, is the second half of the turning point. The encirclement at Bastogne, the surrender demand and its one-word answer, the sky clearing on 23 December, and the 4th Armored Division punching a corridor into the town on 26 December, even as German thrusts lose calendar and fuel. 20 to 21 December, rings and road stars. The attack's calendar collides with 2 American knots. St. Vith, held by a scratch force under Brig. General Bruce C. Clark soaks up German columns until 23 December, denying 5th Panzer Army clean westbound lanes. Bastogne hardens at the same time. Elements of 10th Armored Division and the 101st Airborne Division Complete a 360-degree perimeter between the evening of the 20th and the morning of the 21st, blocking the 7-road hub Manteuffel marked in red. Encirclement is real by the 21st. The Meuse timetable is already slipping. December, paper versus policy. At late morning, Elsenborn Panzer Corps delivers a typed ultimatum to the USA commander of the encircled town of Bastogne, granting 2 hours to surrender under threat of annihilation by heavy artillery. The acting division commander, Brig. General Anthony C. McAuliffe, sends back a one-word reply. Nuts! The exchange clarifies the day. There will be no capitulation and no pause. It also fixes the attacker's dilemma. Bastogne must be taken now, or their westward momentum stalls while the sky threatens to clear. December. The ceiling breaks. Cold air scours the overcast. From morning onward, Allied air returns in strength. C-47 serials of IX Troop Carrier Command drop hundreds of tons of ammunition, rations, and medical supplies into Bastogne's marked panels. Gliders begin to land with surgical teams and critical kit. Fighter bombers range along the Ardennes roads, bridge cuts, column strafes, and choke point bomb runs, punishing march tables that had assumed a full week of cover. The shield that made 16 to 19 December possible disappears in a day. 25 December. German thrusts meet elastic defense. Counterpushes strike north and south of Bastogne to pry open the ring. Champs, Hemrol, and Marvy-Neff see armor infantry attacks in darkness and dawn. The defenders answer with pre-registered 105, 155 mm barrages, bazooka ambushes at 10-20 paces, and M18 Hellcats that sprint, fire, and vanish before counter-battery finds them. In the north, columns angling on the Amblève and Orth rivers bog down on blown crossings and icy detours. Farther west, a single German spearhead, 2nd Panzer Division, reaches the Celles area near the Meuse by 24 December, only to be cut off and forced back within 48 hours as U.S. armor and air converge. December, corridor at Assenois. South of the pocket, 4th Armored Division claws through layered roadblocks and anti-tank belts toward Assenois. By late afternoon, a Sherman from C-37th Tank Battalion, Cobra King, breaks into the outskirts and radios contact with the 101st, roughly 16:45–16:50. The corridor is thin and murderous at first, but it is open. Ammunition trucks roll in under blackout. Ambulances begin to roll out. The siege becomes a logistics lane. What changed, and why? Surprise spent itself in the first 3 days. Thereafter, the attack depended on weather and schedule. St. Vith, to 23 deck, and Bastogne, encircled. 20-21 deck broke the march. Rhythm that should have delivered German armor to the Meuse by day. 4-5, the weather break. 23 deck restored Allied asymmetries. Air interdiction and air resupply. The Assenois corridor, 26 deck, turned the crossroads from a liability for the defenders into a magnet that fixed enemy divisions in place while fuel and time bled away. By the night of 26 December, the one mistake that bought the enemy days has been repaid. By towns that would not fall, a ridge that would not move, a sky that finally cooperated, and a relief column that arrived on schedule. The attack will continue into January, but its decision was written in the week between 20 and 26 December. What almost happened? If the Meuse had been reached in strength by day 4-5, the German timetable, bridgeheads near Vith and Ardennes could have forced the Allies to peel off armies to shield Antwerp, split Anglo-American logistics, and inject political shock into a coalition fighting on momentum. The operational recipe required 4 ingredients that the first 72 hours seemed to supply. 1. A silent approach that blinded Allied SIGINT. 2. Overcast to ground reconnaissance and fighter bombers. 3. Simultaneous ruptures to force route choices the defender couldn't cover. 4. Rapid capture of road hubs, St. Vith, Bastogne, to let columns flow. Had all 4 held through 20 to 22 December, The crossings could have been tested with fuel still in the jerry cans and the sky still shut. What happened? 2 knots. St. Vith, held through 23 December, and Bastogne, encircled 20 to 21 December, supplied from 23 December, corridor opened 26 December, broke the March rhythm. The weather break on 23 December flipped the physics. Allied air interdiction slashed bridges and strafed columns, while C-47 serials resupplied pockets that German artillery was supposed to silence. By 24 to 26 December, 2nd Panzer Division's farthest jab toward the Meuse at Celle was isolated and forced back, and the relief of Bastogne turned the crossroads into a magnet that fixed German divisions in place. The January decision. Hitler authorized a pullback from the Meuse axis in the first week of January 1945, and Allied counter-pressure formalized the outcome. The coordinated counteroffensive began 3rd January, and by 25 January the salient was effectively erased as a map fact. Dates anchor the reversal. 1st January, the Luftwaffe's desperate Bodenplatte raid burned hundreds of fighters on Allied airfields but cost the Germans 200-plus irreplaceable aircraft and veteran pilots in a single day, proof that late surges met empty pipelines. 23 January, U.S. forces retook St. Vith, a bookend to the friction that had slowed the drive in its first week. The casualty ledger. U.S. losses for Ardennes, Alsace, are tallied in official post-war compilations on the order of 89,000 casualties, roughly 19,000 killed, as with 47,500 wounded, and 23,000 missing, captured, with the sharpest shocks tied to 16 to 19 December, e.g., the 6,000 POWs from the 422nd, 423rd of the 106th Infantry Division on 19 December. German casualties across the offensive vary by study, but fall in a broad range of tens of thousands, often cited 167,000, 100,000 plus, inflated by the attrition of retreat under air attack and the January counteroffensive. 2 fixed numbers structure the cost. Time. Measured in the 10 days the Germans needed the sky to stay closed, and fuel, measured in columns halted on iced roads while air cut bridges that could not be repaired fast enough. Logistics as verdict. With Bastogne fed from the air beginning 23 December and by road from 26 December, the garrison's artillery and medical services returned to doctrine. Pre-registered 105-150 fires on code word, and working operating rooms supplied with plasma and whole blood. Conversely, German columns that had budgeted 4-5 days of fuel for a dash found themselves idling while St. Vith and Elsenborn Ridge remained immovable. Every detour consumed liters the plan could not replace. Cause, effect. Towns that held and a sky that cleared converted the Allied intelligence error into a temporary, not decisive advantage, operational consequences beyond the map. The failure to cross the Meuse in strength forfeited the campaign's political aim, shocking the coalition and buying leverage at the conference table. Instead, Third Army's northward drive and First Army's compression from the west wrote a different January. German armored divisions staggered back with vehicle write-offs from air and abandonment. The Luftwaffe bled crews it couldn't replace, and the offensive drained strategic reserves that might have met the Vistula-Oder juggernaut in the east. One winter gamble had tried to buy weeks. It paid days, then debt. The balance sheet of the one mistake. Allied miss, treating radio silence and lack of aerials as lack of threat, proved false at 0530. 16 deck. German gain. 3 to 4 days of operational freedom. Penetrations, POW Hall, columns west. Allied clawback, terrain holds. Elsenborn, St. Vith, Bastogne, weather shift, 23 deck. Relief 26. Deck strategic close. 3 Jan counteroffensive. Salient gone by Elsenborn Ridge. Luftwaffe crippled further by 1 Jan Bodenplatte losses. Surprise had opened the door. Schedule, weather, and road hubs slammed it. The next section distills the lessons that post-war analysts wrote in ink. how mirror imaging and an addiction to Ultra's voice created a seam, and how doctrine changed to make sure silence would never again be read as safety. Lesson 1. Silence is not safety. The Ardennes taught a hard rule for modern intelligence. A negative in one collection lane, e.g., radio, is not a negative overall. In December 1944, German higher headquarters stayed on landlines, kept major nets dark, and used couriers for movement orders. Allied habit treated no chatter as no capacity. Doctrine after action notes flipped that assumption. Sudden quiet on a normally busy net, an indicator, not reassurance. Future watch floors would flag radio blackouts as a positive warning sign, to be checked against human, ground observation, logistic signatures, and, critically, weather. Lesson 2. Weather belongs on the intel board, not just the ops board. From 16 to 22 of December, low cloud and freezing fog grounded reconnaissance and fighter bombers, and thus masked German road movement. The fix went beyond forecasting. Post-mortems pushed for weather contingent I&W, indications and warning. If the enemy can count on overcast, assume they may time movement to it. If ceiling lifts are likely within 48-72 hours, plan to hold key hubs until air can fly. In plain terms, forecast windows, operational windows. Staffs codified that relationship, so a future bad week wouldn't be treated as routine winter, but as a potential risk multiplier. Lesson 3. Mirror imaging kills. Pre-attack assessments insisted Germany lacked the fuel, trained crews, and transport to mount a winter offensive. Therefore, an offensive was unlikely. The enemy solved a different problem. Gather enough fuel for 4 to 5 days, bank on captured dumps thereafter, and hide the march with weather and landlines. After-action doctrine warned against treating our requirements as theirs. The fix. When red teaming, write at least one minimalist hypothesis. What could the adversary do if they only needed days instead of months, local instead of general superiority, and silence instead of deception noise? Lesson 4. Economy of force needs alarm bells. The Ardennes was deliberately thin, an economy of force sector. That choice itself wasn't an error. The alarms were: units rotated, seams lengthened, and frontage per battalion grew without a matched rise in tripwire mechanisms. Armored ready groups, pre-cleared lateral routes, rehearsed displacement for artillery. After-action changes emphasized pre-registered withdrawals, cross-attached armor TD quick reaction elements, and wire plans owned end-to-end by a single headquarters, so a Aero 530 barrage could not sever communications in clusters. The standard became, if you must be thin, you must be fast. Lesson 5. Road hubs rule winter war. Hitler's plan understood the multipliers, St. Vith and Bastogne. The Allies relearned the counter-rule. Buy time with hubs. Post-battle appreciations formalized the priority of 7 road towns for defense and interdiction. If a hub holds 3 to 4 days, a timetable built on speed breaks. If it falls, a corps can flow. The practical fix was map-driven reserve placement, not proportional to frontage, but weighted to the road star math the attacker must solve. Lesson 6. Logistics is a sensing layer. In the opening days, some U.S. ammunition trains and fuel convoys ran into oncoming traffic or were cut behind the line. On the German side, fuel columns were planned for a sprint and then idled as St. Vith and Elsenborn held. Both were intelligence as much as supply. Post-mortems urged tighter movement reporting nets and road control intelligence, MP checkpoints as sensors, so ops centers could feel a developing crisis in near real time. Traffic jams, bridge losses, unexpected detours. Later doctrine treated throughput anomalies as early indicators of operational change. Lesson 7. Resilience beats prediction. No system perfectly predicts a radio-silent, weather-shielded surprise. What saved the campaign was resilience. Local stands at Elsenborn Ridge and St. Vith, the Bastogne perimeter's immediate geometry, and the institutional ability to pivot. Air resupply from 23 December, armored relief on 26 December. Post-war writing stressed pre-made playbooks. If A, silence, plus B, overcast, plus C, thin frontage occurs, then execute a pre-briefed package. Freeze rotations, pre-position artillery ammunition, move mobile reserves to hubs. Task transport for priority evac, and ready airlift for the first clear day. Make reaction a plan, not improvisation. Lesson 8. Count days, not beliefs. The German concept needed days. The Allied error gave them days. The correction took days back. 23 December weather, 26 December corridor, 3rd January counteroffensive, until the balance reversed. Intelligence processes that followed wrote this into checklists. When assessing risk, ask, how many days can the adversary buy if we're wrong? And how many days can we steal back if we're right about our counters? Campaigns are calendars disguised as maps, what the one mistake finally meant. It was not one memo, one man, or one misread prisoner. It was a systemic comfort, confidence in Ultra's voice, in air's reach, in logistics arithmetic, meeting an enemy who silenced, grounded, and sprinted just long enough to cash those comforts in. The aftermath wrote humility into doctrine. Silence can be a signal. Weather can be a weapon. Assumptions must be audited. Hubs are decisive terrain, and resupply from the air can turn a siege into a corridor in a single day. The campaign closes in January 1945, but the habit of mind it corrected, treating what we don't hear as what cannot be, is the real battlefield that got smaller. The map of the Ardennes today is quiet. The lessons written there are not. They are procedures, checklists, and calendars, unromantic things that keep a quiet sector from becoming a surprise again. Night folds over the Ardennes and leaves only the white breath of trees. Maps are rolled. Radios whisper and die. What remains is the arithmetic of days. On 16th December 1944, silence on the air meant confidence. By dawn, it meant something else. Guns spoke for the networks that never did, and a quiet sector revealed how quickly a habit can become a blind spot. The camera can still find the places where the calendar bent. A ridge of frozen earth, Elsenborn, that refused to move. A road star at St. Vith that jammed March tables until 23 December. A 7-road town, Bastogne, that would not open when it had to, then inhaled supplies from the sky once 23 December cleared the ceiling, and exhaled a corridor when 4th Armored reached Ardennes on 26 December. Each node was ordinary on paper. Each became a metronome that set the tempo of a campaign. The mistake was not a villain. It was a habit. Analysts trusted Ultra's voice and air's reach enough to treat their absence as reassurance. The enemy asked for less, 4 to 5 days, not forever. Cover, not clear skies. Landlines, not bravado on the net. And purchased those days with weather and discipline. The bill came due when the ceiling lifted. From 23rd December, Allied air wrote interdiction and resupply into the margin. From 26 December, a single blackout road carried ammunition in and litters out. On 3rd January, the counteroffensive began, and the salient started to drain like a basin. There is no grandeur in these corrections. They look like procedures, pre-registered fires, runner nets, wire plans that live after barrages, reserve routes rehearsed in mud. But procedures are how armies buy back time when judgment has spent it. The lesson is not dramatic. It is durable. Treat silence as a data point, not a comfort. Weigh weather as an ally or an enemy, never a background. Put hubs at the center of plans because roads, not lines on a map, decide what crosses a river and when. Snow falls on the forest that once hid an army. The phones are quiet again, and this time that means nothing at all. Somewhere a clerk closes a file marked Ardennes, 1944-45. Inside, the story is smaller than legend and more useful than myth. A week when an assumption bought the enemy days, and a system, imperfect, bruised, but resilient, earned them back. In war, the difference between disaster and delay is often written in the calendar. Here the calendar kept the verdict.